Aloha everybody, and welcome to this episode of the FFF podcast. FFF being Faith, Family, and Freedom. My co-host Jim Hochberg and I, we are going to drill down into the role of journalists today and how it's changed over the past several years. So let's chat about that. Welcome to the show today, Jim.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
What a lot of people don't know about you, some know, but not everybody knows, is that not only are you an attorney licensed to practice here in the beautiful state of Hawaii, and as you'll notice, since I'm bringing up Hawaii anyway, we are in a wonderful studio called The Space, and we've got a great crew behind the camera. It's called Presentations, and we thank all the hard work that goes behind the camera to make these things happen, so shout out, guys.
And we're very centrally located because this is Mapunapuna.
And that's right, in the beautiful state of Hawaii, which I will never leave Hawaii, but I'm not going to give you this opening. But what a lot of people don't know about you is not only are you licensed to practice here in the state of Hawaii, you are also, you have a minor in journalism.
Kind of. I have a bachelor's degree.
Oh,
journalism.
I'm sorry. I lessened your importance in the community. My bad.
So the truth is, in 1975, I survived Leleho High School in Waiwa, and I went to UH and got a degree in journalism, and then I went to law school.
Okay. Well, okay, so there is a publication, before we attack journalism, which we're going to do we're going to do that. Before we do that, though, I want to give a shout out to the Babylon Bee. And for those of you that don't know what the Babylon Bee is, it's a, what do you call that?
It's a website?
They produce hysterical
it's satire.
news. It's satire, right?
News, so it's a fake news
It's a fake news site.
On purpose.
On purpose. If you have not checked it out, you've got to check it out. But Jim, I know that we've already talked about this on a prior show, but I would love for you to share that one article on the Babylon Bee that is hysterical.
See how high tech I am now.
Yeah, so while he's doing that, what we're going to deal with on the show today is we're going to talk about how the changing face of journalism has affected public policy. It's affected how people plug into their legislature. It's affected how people even relate to their own family members, because people are getting information from a newspaper or from a news reporting, and it's not always the same. And so, Jim.
So, this is the Babylon Bee webpage on my phone.
Okay, Jim.
I get these all the time.
We'll send that link to you.
And the story today is, kids, here are 10 signs your parents might be domestic terrorists. Hey, are you a kid? Are you being raised by normal middle-class parents who love you and care for you? Uh-oh, watch out. They may be dangerous domestic terrorists. Now, this relates to the show we did previously about the FBI coming after parents at school board meetings. So then they give a list of 10 things to look out for. Number 1, do your parents make you pray to Jesus instead of to Dr. Fauci?
Did you say make?
Yeah.
They make you pray.
Your parents.
Okay.
They could be domestic terrorists if they make you pray to Jesus instead of Dr. Fauci. Do they ask you what you learned in school today? Do they say things like, let's threaten people and do violent domestic terrorism to them? If they say this and they're not wearing a BLM t-shirt, it's a bad sign. Do they require sunscreen when you go to the beach? Do they take away the pornographic queer theory book you borrowed in the school library? Do they say racist dog whistles like, this school's CRT curriculum seems pretty racist? You have never seen them dress in drag and go to the local library. They don't have a verified blue check on Twitter. You can see their entire face when they talk. And of course, the piece de la resistance, they voted for Trump.
Oh my goodness.
So if your parents meet these requirements, the Babylon Bee wants you tongue-in-cheek to be concerned that, like the FBI thinks, your parents may be domestic terrorists.
We start off with that just to bring a little humor to the conversation, because we know we're going to drive a few people crazy with what we're going to talk about today. Because people have always, at least my grandparents if they read it in the newspaper, that was serious stuff.
Walter Cronkite was the man.
I'm serious. Well, people would watch the news because they wanted to know what was happening across the nation. And back in the days of true reporting, and that's what I'm going to say, in days of true reporting, you could not tell what side of the issue a reporter was on.
Correct.
They told you what was happening, they would report it, and then let you make up your own mind.
But let me tell you why, from my training in journalism school. Journalists are required to live, well, they used to be required to live by a code of fairness and objectivity, which required that they never publish anything that wasn't confirmed by two sources. They never publish anything without identifying the source. They don't use adjectives, they just present facts. And if you use that as your code of moral objectivism for news reporting, you're actually reporting news. Well, when you do what happens today, which is anonymous sources said, there's no corroboration, you don't know who the source is, and it's obviously shrouded in a political attack, that violates the entire code of journalistic standards that I had to learn to get my degree.
It's interesting that you bring that up because that was going to be the question. We hear that a lot now, people referring to anonymous sources. And there is a time and a place to have an anonymous source. If somebody is reaching out a story and maybe they're a victim of domestic violence or maybe they're a whistleblower, something like that, you want them to be anonymous so that there is not any...
No, you don't.
Okay.
No, you don't.
I would disagree with that only because I do believe there might be times where you want to protect the person who's giving the information. But I think
very slim, very, very slim.
Okay, I will give you that it's probably shouldn't happen as often as it's happening. But the point is, it is happening more and more now, where that's what they're saying.
That's all they're doing.
This is my
if
anonymous
the subject
source.
of the investigation is Trump, it's all anonymous sourcing. And now, years later, you find out that they were actually the complainers were the ones actually doing the stuff they were complaining about.
Now, let's talk about a couple of examples. There was a doctor by the name of John Campbell who took apart an article that was done by the BBC. Now, the BBC is
and you're talking about the video, which
yes.
you're going to give everybody the URL
yes,
to go
we'll
look.
have the URL to that
okay.
available. The BBC did an article, and the article was entitled Ivermectin, How False Science Created a COVID Miracle Drug. And so he, as a doctor, he opened up the article and read it, and he was very concerned with the serious number of errors that he claims are in this article.
And when you watch this video and you see him take a pen and underline the things that are wrong, that's what it was like to be in journalism school. You turn in an article and that's what you get back with, what is this? What is this? This isn't true, blah, blah. So it was kind of PTSD for me there.
Well, okay, so as we're looking at this article, and if you watch it, you're going to notice that, like Jim said, that he tears it apart. And the reason that I call out this particular YouTube video is because he does what we all should be doing when we're reading an article.
Absolutely.
Is he looked at it with just in a black and white sense. Okay, you're telling me by this title what I'm going to learn by this article.
Do you remember the phrase critical thinking? Remember that skill? That's what he was doing.
Yes.
That's what we need to do.
Yes. So one of the things the article says in there, and this is a quote from the article, it says, the BBC can reveal that more than a third of 26 major trials of the drug for use on COVID have serious errors or signs of potential fraud.
And so the question becomes, oh, what are they?
The question, they go on in this article to say that how they got this information was a group that was meeting on Twitter. So they were all meeting and so this doctor went nuts because he said, reference please.
Exactly.
And in the article, there is no reference to this. The other thing that concerned him is when they're talking about 26 major trials, if they're doing an article and they're referencing these 26 major trials, you would think there would be source references to these 26.
And these days, hopefully a hot link, so
yes.
I can click it and read it.
Yes. Well, he was able to find, just based because he's a doctor, so he kind of knew how to do the research. He pulled up a couple of these major trials, and some of them had been not discontinued, but sometimes when they do trials, they'll come back and they'll go, oh, you know, this isn't accurate, so we'll retire it, so to speak.
If it doesn't meet scientific standards, there's no reason to go on. And it cannot meet scientific standards for any reasons. Maybe something got spoiled, maybe they gave the placebo to the wrong group one time, or whatever. I mean, you can spoil a scientific experiment.
Exactly. So he was concerned that they were citing these type of trials in their reporting of these 26 major trials, that he as a doctor had trouble finding these 26 major trials. But what worries me is probably what happened in England is that people saw that the BBC said 26 trials, this is bad, ivermectin is not good for you. I am not making a claim for ivermectin, so please people do not start sending me studies.
This is about journalism.
This is about journalism, so let's stick to the subject. All I know is that you're going to have people reading this article that are now going to be afraid to use ivermectin should they make that choice.
Or they can watch his video and realize that it was a bunch of propaganda.
Well, most people won't do that, and that's why
Our people are going to do it because you're going to give them the link.
Well, that's the point. Well, the point is that question. When you read an article, don't just assume because it's published in the Honolulu Star Advertiser or Civil Beat or any of these. I want to say, because again, I don't want to get a shout, a nasty email from reporters saying, hey, I try my best. I know some reporters that are very good at what they do, and they do try to put out proper information. So for you reporters out there and you journalists that are doing your job and doing what you were trained to do, mahalo, 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 because you're doing a great service to the people in the community.
But one other thing that I learned in journalism school, which is why I decided not to be a journalist and go to law school instead, is when you're a reporter and you do all this work and you get all this story and you turn it in, it doesn't necessarily get published at all, or it doesn't get published the way you wrote it. It can be totally flipped around by the editor into a different story. So my desire to be a journalist was completely wet-toweled if the information was going to be censored by the people above me in the process. So I decided, that's okay, I'll just go to law school instead.
If you want to have a great experience, go to newspapers.com and sign up for a subscription. It does cost, unfortunately. And go pull up some articles from the Star Bulletin or the Honolulu Advertiser from back in the day and look at the letters to the editor. And then fast forward to today and look at the letters to the editor. And what people don't know is that letters to the editor are also edited. So when people send it in, they don't always say, oh, thank you, and they take it 100%.
Yeah, sometimes they take out like the key sentence that proved your whole point.
Absolutely.
Happens to me.
So when you're reading, and that's another point to make, is when you're reading these letters to the editor, know that that may not even be the actual intent letter. So what I tell people is if you write a letter to the editor and you send it in and they publish it and it's not what you said, you do have a right later on in your own social media to say, here was my letter as I submitted it to the paper, so that people can see. Because again, going back to the source information, you want to see actually what was reported. And this happens even in editorials. Editorials are edited by the editor.
Correct.
How can I say that like 5 times and confuse myself?
But remember when you were like in middle school or
no,
when
it was
I
way
was
too long
when
ago.
I was in middle school, I kind of like didn't believe anything. I questioned everything. That's the way we have to approach things that we read, because everybody can publish anything they want online. They can make it look like a real thing with, banners and all that stuff. And it could be completely false, like the Babylon Bee. They do it intentionally. Do you know they got fact-checked? Somebody didn't know it was a satire site and they got fact-checked. I mean, how dumb is that? But that's what we're dealing with.
Look, let's talk about the fact checkers. That's a whole nother show.
Correct.
The fact checkers that are fact checking aren't always fact checking the facts.
So what we need to do is own what's going on in our lives. We have to own it. And I talk about this ad nauseum, but I really believe that's the truth. If we don't own our local government and our national government our state government, if we don't act like we own it, we are going to let other people who do act like they own it control it. And that's what we're suffering with right now. We have to act like we own information, so we have to question information.
The other point that we want to make as we come back into the discussion is, please don't get your news from social media. If somebody sends you something and goes, hey, look what I read, and then you're like forwarding it out to 15,000 people, the problem is that you might be forwarding good information, but you might not. And this is part of the reason we're having this discussion today, is because there is so much information out there. We started the show talking about, in the old days, my grandparents would get all of their information from the news. That's what they did. They looked forward to it, right? The 5 o'clock news.
3 channels was all they were.
3 channels. One of the good things about Hawaii. Anyway, I can see that happening now, but people looked to the news for current factual information. You fast forward to today, and it's not just the news anymore. People have YouTube channels, and I've watched, in fact, I binge on YouTube. So I love some of the YouTubers that are out there. Some of them are entertainment. Some of them, they tell you they're entertainment. In fact, I have to laugh that a lot of the YouTube channels will start off going, this is my information, this is only my opinion, and it's only to be used for educational purposes only, because they want people to know that they're not producing news. You and I are not a news station.
Nope.
So even us as this podcast, as you're listening to that, we're providing information from our 20 plus years of experience right here in Hawaii. You might see other podcasts that are out there, but the difference is Jim and I have experience in addition to what we talk about. And that's what we're sharing. That's the mana'o we're sharing with you today. But let's talk about a recent article to the point of listening to the news.
So in the beginning of June, 2021, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser had a front page banner headline above the fold, the big news of the day, that more people died in Hawaii from the flu and pneumonia in the last year than from COVID.
That wasn't in June, wasn't that in October? Wasn't that pretty recent?
I'm sorry, October.
Yes. Okay.
This is October. That's crazy.
We're giving you the truth. We own it.
That's yeah, I don't know, why did I think this was June? Am I going somewhere in July? I did.
You did.
I went to the mainland. Anyway,
but we digress.
So this article talked about how the implication of the article, basically, which is what I took out of it, is based on the numbers that were reported in the Star-Advertiser front page, big headline, main story of the day, more people died in Hawaii from the flu and pneumonia than COVID in the last year. And that really just gnarled at me, because how many days, every day actually, does the news tell us 7 people died today from COVID, 1 on Oahu, 2 on Kauai, whatever, every day the deaths and the positive test results for COVID, right? And if more people were dying by the flu and pneumonia, if they had told us that, it would have put it in a completely different context. It wouldn't have been scary. We wouldn't have had public policy driven by that number the way it was. So now a week later, or 4 or 5 days later, there's another story which I haven't read, but you told me about.
Yeah, so this goes to the story of how people will look at the news and they'll say, okay, this is what the news is reporting, so this is how we need to look at this incident. So on Thursday, October 14th, the headline was, Hawaii flu pneumonia report includes hundreds of COVID fatalities. And in that article, it says this: a page 1 headline on a Monday Honolulu Star-Advertiser article about the influenza season incorrectly stated the flu was deadlier than COVID-19. This is a paper now correcting its own front page. So you've got 2 front page, same newspaper, that have completely separate.
So I haven't read the article, like I said. I'm going to, and I'm going to look at what they're referring to. I'm going to guess in advance here, this is just speculation, that today's story, the second story, is probably saying died with COVID.
That's absolutely
as opposed to died of COVID, which was the first story. And the reason that's important is, in America, if you jumped out of an airplane and your parachute didn't open and you hit the ground and died and they tested your blood and you had COVID, you would be listed as a COVID death. Okay? That's the way they're doing this.
Yes, and you're right, because the state epidemiologist Sarah Kemble said in this article, and I quote, "In Hawaii and around the world, COVID-19 was far deadlier than the flu during the 2021 flu season. There was one confirmed influenza death in Hawaii between September 27, 2020 and October 2, 2020.
And that's impossible. In scientific reality.
It's in the paper.
And the reason that's
It's
impossible.
in the paper.
Okay, but the reason that it's impossible, so there's a friend of my wife and I who's been a nurse in Honolulu for 40 years, worked in the big hospitals, and I sent her the first article about how more people died of the flu and pneumonia. And she emailed me back after she read it, and she goes, you know, that totally makes sense to me, because up until this past year, we've had about 600 or 700 flu pneumonia deaths every year for the whole 40 years I've been a nurse. So it makes sense that that's about how many there were. And she added in the way they're counting COVID deaths, not dying of COVID, but dying with COVID. That's like if I committed suicide and I had a hangnail and they said I died with a hangnail, it doesn't really much matter.
You know, the other thing that I want to talk about, and I think that you'll appreciate this again, because you and I have over 20 years of experience. You know, sometimes people get other groups that are doing different things that may agree with us on some of what we're doing. They get interviewed and they think that is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because they got called to have this interview. And you and I are chuckling. They don't call us. Because what is the news looking for sometimes when they're looking for people to interview?
You know what? These days they call it clickbait.
They want the
Crazy.
one person
Yeah.
that is out there doing things that are absolutely ridiculous, because that sells newspapers.
And it paints everybody that agrees with their position on the issue in the same light.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point, because one of the articles you and I looked at when we were looking at this episode is an article called "Black and White and Undead All Over," and this is a true story of innovation and perseverance of America's small newspapers. And one of the things that
Do you want to define small newspaper before you get into it? Because we don't have any here, really, except maybe West Hawaii News and the Maui today.
Yeah.
We don't really have any of these types
We
of
don't
papers.
really have small news, but the point isn't the small newspapers. The point that I want to make is that one of the people that were interviewed for this article said that what happens a lot, and I think that this kind of ties into what we're talking, is that people, they put newspaper reporters into the category of media. So when people say the media is horrible today, that everybody who does anything at all to do with reporting are lumped into that. And again, we want to make it clear that we're not calling out every single person who works, you know, doing, because it's a hard job to do, for one thing. You and I know from being out there all the time, when people don't like what you're saying, you get some nasty emails. I mean, talk about terroristic threatening. I mean, when
It's not terroristic threatening if you're not in imminent fear of bodily or property damage.
I did get some terroristic threats.
But they weren't standing in your room. It came in the mail.
We were getting.
I used to get a lot of hate
We
mail.
were
really
getting
ugly
hate,
hate
yeah, where they'd say things like, you better be
You call
checking
yourself
your brakes.
a Christian.
No,
you know,
these
all that
were,
kind of
you
weird
better
stuff.
check your brakes.
Oh.
Stuff that would make me scared. I had to hire Jim to help us because we had an individual who was threatening to come onto the property of Hawaii Family Farm, and we're on private property. And so I had to basically hire Jim because I was scared. I was worried, not so much for my safety, so much as I was of just the bullying that comes with some of this stuff. So I guess the points we're making in the show today is be responsible with what it is you're reading, whatever it is you're reading.
Have critical thinking hat on. Don't just read the words and say, oh, that must be true.
And check your sources. And you know what? I'm going to say this, and it's painful to say this, but it even means in some of the Christian media that's out there. I'm not saying that they're all bad, because they're not. In fact, I would say that most of them are pretty good. But just because it's on a Christian station or whatever, you still need to use critical thinking. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm not just out there, because I can be in left field by myself.
No, I agree.
And again, don't send me nasty emails, because I'm trying my best to put out good stuff, and I know there's good people out there.
So this has the First Amendment in it.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about.
Well, we appreciate you spending your time with us here on the FFF podcast. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to share it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you'll know every time we upload a new video, and comment.
Yeah, we would like to know what you think.
All right, and visit us on the web at hawaiifamilyforum.org and learn more about Hawaii Family Forum. We'll see you next time. Mahalo, everybody.